The Syntax of Things by Arisha. Chapter 52, parentheses, lies. Agreed upon. Harry attempted a polite smile, which was only delivered as a pained grimace. He clenched his fists together, his elbows resting on his knees. Dumbledore sat beside him on the bed. Severus waited.
"Why don't you tell me how the two of you are getting along, then?"
Dumbledore smiled, too, in a way only Severus knew, and the warning that crept behind the loving eyes was enough to make Severus's guilt steam up. Harry eyed him, too, unsure of what to say. He stared hastily at his own hands, and then back to Severus. To his intense embarrassment, Severus felt the need to protest. "I cannot help you."
"All is well,"
Severus said at last.
"No," Harry said. "Nothing is, sir. I'm going to Hogwarts. I'm going back. Whatever it is that you're going to say, the answer is no. You can't keep me here."
Dumbledore smiled.
"Keep you here? No, of course not. I have no such intention. I regret all that you've been through this summer. Disconnected from your friends, your family, must have been hard."
"My friends are my family, sir."
"Wars must end, Harry," Dumbledore continued. "But for wars to end, wars must begin. As bothersome as it is, we can only prepare."
Severus watched as Harry ran a hand through his hair and scratched his scar.
"And how do we do that, then?" "I am planning to travel soon, in search of what must be found. Severus will be in charge of Hogwarts while I'm away."
Hosanna! At last, the inclusive plan he'd never asked for.
"You said in your letter that you may have the chance to choose, yes, staying at Hogwarts or coming to find me. If I find myself in need of assistance, let's say."
"I'm coming with you, sir," Potter said at once.
"You misunderstand me."
Dumbledore paused, squeezing the boy's arm kindly.
"If I find myself in need of assistance, it is to be assumed that things went terribly wrong. In fact, I look forward to completing my search without burdening you with it in the slightest."
Harry shook his head. "So is that it? You've kept me here, teaching me legitimacy and stuff all summer, just so I can simply go back to classes while you go away and do all the work by yourself." "Potter!" It was a traitorous impulse that made Severus interrupt them, but he had nothing to justify it with.
"Severus taught you legitimacy."
"I only showed him the very basics," he said fast. "No need to fret." And Harry stared at him, realizing Severus had lied to him again, realizing Dumbledore had never asked him to teach Harry anything but occlumency in the first place, realizing Dumbledore wasn't even aware of Severus's clever little trick to make Harry feel like he wasn't entirely wasting away in here. Dumbledore stared too. Severus waited. Wasn't this all tremendous?
"Excuse me,"
said Harry, choking on what sounded like disgust. Jolting up, he disappeared to the bathroom, walking past Severus without acknowledging them at all. Once the door was closed behind him, Severus cast a muffliato and turned to Dumbledore. "Is that your final plan, then?" he sneered. Dumbledore nodded.
"It is. We have plenty of time to discuss the arrangements. I've spoken to Minerva. She's the only one who knows of this so far."
Severus momentarily closed his eyes in concentration. "The Dark Lord. He gave me a month. He started waiting. He wants me to take care of you, and so very conveniently you decide to leave Hogwarts now."
"I am in search of something important, Severus."
Severus nodded. The Horcruxes. If only he could tell Dumbledore that he had figured that out. If only Dumbledore had told him everything instead of letting him figure it out by himself. Anyway.
"How is he?"
Dumbledore asked, glancing at the bathroom door. Severus smiled. "Well, you can imagine."
"I can imagine, yes,"
Dumbledore said in a low tone. Severus was aware of nodding his head again, but couldn't exactly recall deciding to do so. Sleep deprivation usually had little effect on him through the years. Looking after Potter wasn't exactly as easy.
"Second thoughts?"
"None," said Severus. "Tell me what I have to do." Severus entered the hearth only because he was obliged to do so. Were he a free man, he would go straight home and sleep. That was what a man should do at 4 a.m. after a cruelly prolonged Death Eater meeting, after having to sit through Dolohov proudly recounting his rape attempts in between sips of wine, after having to smile along with what he hoped passed as vague satisfaction because a Muggle victim wasn't a victim at all, because a Muggle person wasn't a person at all, After having the Dark Lord pat Severus's head in sympathy for having to bear the burden of pretending to be on Dumbledore's side, or look at him with that silent warning for the moment he might decide to stop doing so. Severus was aware of his clothes smelling of cigar and mint, that familiar disturbing scent that clung on to him every time he departed from Lucius's manor. In the darkness of the small room, he was barely conscious of a hushed voice talking to him as he sat on the bed, only to recall there was a chair for that.
Sir?
Severus inhaled slowly. He needed to be alone. Why had he come here at all? A vague part of his mind reminded him that Harry would have worried himself sick if no one appeared after an entire day in complete isolation.
"The boy, Severus," the Dark Lord said, and Severus's eyes never left the shiny red ones. "He will be out of the way soon, sooner than Dumbledore expects, and then the wizarding world will at long last be faced with justice. The old ways will be forgotten, just like the boy will be. A new page shall be written."
"Yes, my lord," Severus replied. He never imagined grief would resemble fear so much. His heart was bleeding to death, and somehow he was still alive, still functioning, still dreadfully unaffected. Save her! He at once begged Dumbledore, and for the life of us he couldn't understand why he hadn't tried to save her himself. He could have gone over to Godric's Hollow weeks, months before the Dark Lord decided to attack, ring the bell, own his mistake, face the betrayal, confess what he'd done. He could have told her himself. He could have tried. Give it a go. Be brave the real way, and protect her from the Dark Lord's madness without relying on Dumbledore to do so instead. But he hadn't. He couldn't. What could he have said? "You're going to die because of me." When death happened, Severus always looked the other way, always told himself he'd deal with it later. That later was now. Potter kicked the sheets away, and a hand gripped his shoulder. Severus yanked it away.
"Severus, what's going on?"
"You're going to die because of me." The words didn't come. Severus's lips tightened, and he willed himself to relax. He was here to inform the boy that everything was all right. He would then go back to Spinner's End and throw up the gallons of alcohol he had engulfed. The tiny devil on his shoulder whispered boldly in his ear that this explanation didn't match the fact that he'd brought a bottle tonight with him. Here, of all places. This was the last place on earth where alcohol should be accessible from. He tried to remember that.
"You're shaking."
No, that's what it was. That's what this too familiar sleepy voice was. That voice that did nothing to make this night better. "You're going to die because of me. Say it. This time, say it." Shaking was far from what he was. He was scared, appalled, heartbroken, amazed at the steadiness of Potter's hands as they pulled his cloak off his shoulders and tossed it aside.
"Have you told Dumbledore?"
Severus nodded his head in what he believed to be an affirmative fashion and closed his eyes. He rested his forehead on his hands and demanded away his crushing headache. Harry's hands warmed his shoulders as they rubbed off his tension. He was aware of the bottle resting against his thigh being picked up, and he flinched in protest.
"You don't need this."
"You're not to drink," Severus warned. His voice was hoarse. The bottle was gone. Why was it gone? He wanted it back, now.
"I won't drink it,"
Harry promised.
"I'm just putting it aside."
He didn't have a mind to protest. He could think of no good reason alcohol was being denied to him. He felt like being punished. The grip on his shoulders hardened, and two rough limbs pushed into his flesh. It occurred to him that the deplorable sound he'd heard was his own moan. He exhaled sharply. His shirt was soaked in his own sweat, and it stuck on him like a second skin. He needed a shower. Harry pulled him back, and Severus found himself resting on the soft pillows. Harry lied down too, draping the blankets over their bodies, his forehead against Severus's. A muscle throbbed in the side of Severus's jaw.
"It's okay, just close your eyes,"
whispered Harry. "You're going to die because of me."
"You're going to..."
Severus's vision went bleary, and he shut his eyes. His trembling fingers found Harry's, and he squeezed.
"I'm not going to drink. Promise."
Severus chose not to answer. It occurred to him that he was being soothed, and he'd sooner top himself than allow such a thing. He didn't do soothing. He refused to receive it, too. Time healed all wounds, people said. Severus did not agree. Despite popular belief, wounds always remained. In time, the mind, protecting its own sanity, would cover them with scar tissue, and the pain would gradually lessen. In the end, it had become invisible to the naked eye, but deep down it remained. His pain for Lily's death only came after she was gone. This current pain for Harry was something he could not explain. The boy was alive. For now. His clenched fist was forced loose, and steady fingers intertwined with Severus's. He needed a drink.
Tomorrow,
Harry said. Had he said that out loud? He slept. Severus was awakened by the tapping sunlight. He groaned and wondered how long he'd slept. He blinked, shut his eyes, then blinked again. He yawned. The constant pressure on his conscience by something he should be aware of was forbidding him to go back to sleep. Soft raven hair brushed his lips and he grunted. Some people woke up drowsy. Some people woke up energized. Severus had just woken up dead! He entangled himself from the equally dead octopus that happened to be Harry Potter and took a moment to look at him. Eyelids closed against the light, breathing deep and relaxed. The muscles on his face and body were at peace. Not the twitch, not the spasm, only his chest rising and falling with every intake of air. Severus felt jealousy at the boy's oblivion. He searched for innocence, but Severus knew that the closed eyelids hid sinister eyes. Somehow, he had fallen for this boy. And someday, he'd touch him with his fingers, and he'd burn holes in his skin with his own mouth, and it'd hurt when he'd look at him, and it'd hurt when he wouldn't, and it'd feel like someone had cut him open with a jagged piece of glass. The sharp pain of the bleeding was almost real already. Too soon. Too late. He placed a hand on Harry's chest. He shook him lightly. Harry. Severus had been happy in his sleep. He woke up with a feeling of falling apart, of cracking up from the inside and slowly breaking into pieces. Harry wrinkled his nose in acknowledgement. His hand came up to where Severus's was resting on his chest and touched it. It fell on the sheets right after and stayed there. Severus's heart jumped. Little bugger-twisted child, what have you done to me? His skin crawled and he was incapable of managing a single clear thought. How would it feel to slide his hand lower? No! Severus promised himself strict punishment if such thoughts continued. Self-torture if necessary. Necessary. Definitely necessary. Potter's eyes snapped open. Severus's thoughts were crushed to bits just as they had begun to take shape. Potter looked up at him confusedly. It was the stillness between them that tied his stomach in a hangman's noose. It was that same deadly lack of noise that lived in the darkness of graves, the one that crept in alleys no sane man should ever know. Harry stretched and yawned, and Severus had to mentally curse himself for thinking over the possible ways he could shut that mouth for good. His own nerve was betraying him.
Morning,
mumbled Harry as he rolled over and hid his head under the pillow. His arse was momentarily raised in a stretching position that looked suspiciously pre-planned. Good morning, said Severus. The last night's panic had passed, but his shirt needed washing, and he most certainly needed to clean himself thoroughly, too. He decided to get rid of the boy as soon as possible. He then remembered that this was the one wish that never worked. It will soon.
Little moments,
murmured Harry. A ridiculous grin was splashed across his face.
Waking up late and having someone gawk at you.
He was not gawking at him. Not bloody likely. I was merely studying the source of my bad luck. Was that the best you could do? Looking at you makes me wonder if you're even worth the trouble I'm getting into. There! Harry scrunched his face, and with an impressively quick move, he pulled the pillow from under his head and attempted to strike him. Severus dodged it before it hit him in the ribs. He hadn't had a pillow fight in decades, and he wasn't going to have one now. Harry giggled as he attempted to hit him again, just as Severus yanked the pillow violently from him and tossed it away. Harry was going for the other pillow when Severus curled his hand around his wrist and pinned him down. There was another moment of giggling. Then Harry's smile faded into something else. Stupid little shit. Severus allowed himself a second to battling between leaving this prison in silence and granting Harry a last smirk of triumph. Apparently 1 second was too long.
Look, I'm not buying it, and
Severus tightened his grip. Potter grinned.
And I know you were gawking at me. Why do you like to pretend you're a jerk when you could just be nice to me?
Severus smirked.
Little moments. I'm not buying it.
Harry said again. Damn his impossible stubbornness. Severus let go of his hand and got up, ignoring Harry's disappointed grunt. Hurrying to the bathroom, Severus emptied his bladder, washed his face, and spared himself a moment to look at the mirror. When he returned to the main room, he found that the boy had fallen asleep again.
It's almost noon, he snarled,
and was ignored.
Potter!
All for the best. His face was buried into the pillow again, which was now being straddled and hugged.
Child.
He shrugged off his thoughts and fought off the sudden impulse to shout in the boy's ear just to see him jump up in terror. There was a time he'd have enjoyed that. He'd still do. Then a murmur.
Go back to bed.
Severus stared. His heart skipped a beat, and he was suddenly reminded of all the reasons he'd taught himself the unforgivable so long ago. His stomach lurched at the boy's sleepy face as he struggled to focus his eyes without those damn glasses on. It occurred to him that Potter looked happy. A chuckle was muffled against the pillow and Potter rolled on his back, covering his eyes with a hand.
I bet you look scared.
He wasn't scared. He was nauseated, outraged. Late! I'm leaving. Do try not to spend the rest of your day lazing around like a fool. Harry laughed.
Yeah, have a nice day too.
Despite himself, Severus didn't manage to feel annoyed.